Happy Sunday. Welcome to Our Issues Birmingham. I'm talking with Kyle Whitmire. Reckon.com, AL.com, all over the place.
Birmingham news. Just
Yeah.
like, we have so many brands I have to keep up with.
You
Trouble
do.
keeping up with them.
I have trouble finding them. Or which one my computer
we hope for all that stuff to find you. The plan is that, it'll creep into your life when
I am really
take those decisions away from you.
I am really troubled about talking about something in front of my phone or my computer and then being sent something related to what I was talking about.
Yeah,
that's creepy.
That happens to me sometimes, and I'm just.
Doesn't it bother you?
It does. It does.
I mean, I even trick it sometimes. I go off on some edge just to see what'll happen. And
well, I hope it's not recording what I say in my car, because that's
where you have
I'm
your
just
best,
like a crazy person.
Your best
babbling.
monologues are in your car. That's my best opening and closing
My 3-year-old
statement.
yelled at me the other day because I was shouting at somebody, and he says, "Too loud, Daddy, too loud."
Inside voice.
Inside voice.
All right, what's going on in the world? Let's narrow it.
Well, that's a big. The world's a big place.
All right, let's not talk about Birmingham.
Okay.
Let's talk about the state.
Okay.
All right, so we have an election coming up.
Mm-hmm.
The world knows we're taping this show, so
Right.
we're taping this before the primary. So we're sort of making an educated guess about what November looks like, and what you might see as issues out there for whatever person ends up in the slot. I'm not asking you to guess about who's going to be against who else, but we've talked about before, we are a state that has no elected official at the top,
Right.
which is pretty amazing in and of itself.
Yeah, it's pretty frightening. I think that the thing that everybody's going to be looking at after last year's Senate race is whether or not we have moved any closer to being a two-party state again.
Well, so I have this feeling internally that the pendulum that swings left and right is moving slightly left. And in my terms, that's from Republican to Democrat.
Sure.
Or from conservative to, I'm not going to say liberal, but less conservative. Would be the best way. Even and we're talking statewide
in
level.
Alabama, being a liberal just means you're unarmed, right?
Well, then I'm a liberal.
No, I think one thing that we saw consistently through the polling in last year's Senate election is that there's a big gap in your younger age groups.
Yeah.
Between people who identify as Republicans and self-identify as Democrats. And
well, you have some of that age group doesn't even want to be a Democrat.
Well, but that's always sort of been the case, right? There's that old joke about if you're 20 and you're a conservative, you have no heart. If you're 50 and you're a liberal, you have no brain. People do get more conservative over time. But one thing that the polling is showing two things. One is that the inflection point where people sort of make that shift is moving further and further, is getting older and older. So if you, in last year's Senate election, if you were over the age of 65, you were almost certain to be a Roy Moore supporter. If you were under the age of 45, you were pretty likely to be a Doug Jones supporter. But not only is that an inflection point moving further or getting older, the gap between younger voters who self-identify as Republicans and Democrats has widened considerably in the younger age group. So there's sort of this little pig in the python moving. I don't think that this year is going to be the year that we have suddenly a two-party state again. But maybe 4-6 years down the line, that could very well be the case. And I think you might see, in some suburban races, see, party competitive races this fall, and maybe in our governor's race. I think our governor's race will be a lot closer than what we have been accustomed to in these last 3 or 4 election cycles.
And what do you think is a contributing factor to that? What you just said? Or
some of it is going to be, some of it's Donald Trump. Some of it is going to be the Democrats this year, and it's good on their part, are fielding better candidates than they have in the past. Or in some cases, they're just fielding candidates, period, because they've had problems in past election cycles. Heck, 4 years ago, we were sitting around waiting to see if Parker Griffith was going to show up to sign his qualifying papers, and it looked as, for a moment, that there would be no opposition in the governor's race. Now you have, 5 candidates, I believe, on the Democratic side who are vying for that slot. Including Sue Bell Cobb and Walt Maddox. So it's much more competitive, and really down the ballot you have a lot more candidates who are running as Democrats. And the first thing, if you're going to win elections, is you got to show up, and you've got to have good candidates. And those things, those on the Democratic side, seem to be improving. And at the same time, I think, and we'll see if this carries out over time or if it was just sort of a strike of lightning, but I think Roy Moore alienated a lot of younger, moderate Republican voters who are now being pushed into more of an independent mindset.
Yeah. We don't have much time left in this segment, but I do want to talk about, when we come back, you touched on it, the lack of communication from our current anointed governor. Don't go away. This is Our Issues Birmingham. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Our Issues Birmingham. Right before break, I mentioned we were talking about changes of tide in the state of Alabama from a political standpoint, and the alienation of some of the Roy Moore opposition people.
Right.
Governor Ivey seems to be running a race that's very peculiar to me, in that she won't address her opponents. She hardly will show up for an ice cream cone, except at Regents Field. It was a horrible pitch, by the way, that she threw.
It was Thirsty Thursday.
Oh, I get it. So that's unusual, isn't it? Am I missing something? Have there been other, I'm not talking about Alabama, just go beyond. Have there been other politicians who have elected to remain radio silent, except for some gun commercials?
Oh, typically we see it in the general election, but not like this in the primary. You go back 4 years ago, Robert Bentley would not debate Parker Griffith, his Democratic opponent. Really didn't campaign that much or reference him that much, except when he was attacked politically by Parker Griffith. So that's not that uncommon in a general election, but I don't know that we've seen anything like this in a party primary before. Usually, especially when, Kay Ivey holds that office, but she was not elected to that office.
Right.
But she is very popular in the state, if you believe the polling that's out there.
What is the polling saying?
I mean,
is it close?
A survey across the country shows that she's the 3rd most popular governor in America.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and because
who conducted that survey?
Well, I kind of call it the Langford Bell effect, right? After Larry Langford left here in Birmingham to go to federal housing in Kentucky, William Bell stepped into that void, and for a while was very popular, and wasn't necessarily accomplishing a lot. And it was 2 election cycles later before a serious challenger could unseat him. And I think that Kay Ivey is getting the benefit of comparison of having come after this cataclysmic event of Robert Bentley. And look, her best strategy right now is to deliver checks to civic groups that the state hands out, take credit for those things, deliver a nice 5-10 minute stump speech, and then get out of the room. The longer she's there, the more likely she is to make a mistake. And there have been questions about her health. Her opponents have brought it up. They produced all their medical records. She produced a letter from her doctor saying that she was in good health. But there have been moments when reporters have talked to her when she's, I won't say that she's not all there. That sounds like she's losing her mind, but that she's just not quite as focused as she might be from one moment to the next. Disjointed, that's probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, I get that way.
So politically,
towards the last taping,
yeah.
which I am right now with you. I'm a little slightly disjointed, but you're keeping me straight. Thank you.
But the thing that bothers me about this is if you go back 4 years ago, we had a governor who refused to debate his opponent, who said things like, we're never going to raise taxes in this state. There's no need to do that. We don't have budget problems in this state. A week after Election Day, he says, oh my God, we found out that there's this huge hole in our budget and we're going to have to raise taxes to fill that hole. Well, that's something that should have come out before Election Day, and it should have come out during debates, during our, a political process. And now we're seeing the same sort of thing all over again with a candidate who's decided that she's going to sidestep the traditional political process, skip out on debates, skip out on forums, and not really campaign because she's just popular enough that she doesn't have to do that.
Yeah, it would seem to me to be the exact opposite. I mean, it would seem to me that I would want to address my opponent and establish why I'm a better candidate than the opponent is.
Well, you're a lawyer. That's what you do, right?
Yeah. My case is believable.
Right. But these are politicians, and the problem for
they want to be liked.
The challengers right now is, they're having trouble. They've gotten some money, but they've had trouble getting exposure. A lot of people throughout the state don't know their names. They have name ID problems. And if you're Kay Ivey, if suddenly you're in a metaphorical fist fight with them on stage somewhere, they're getting part of your limelight. So
there's that aspect of it. I hadn't thought about that. What about Attorney General's race?
Whew.
Is that a separate segment by itself?
We're sort of speaking to a future audience here. I think it is going to be ugly. What we're seeing right now on this side of the primary.
I'm talking, on the Republican side.
Yeah,
I mean, it's. I think it's tight at the top.
Troy King has great name recognition, but no one can remember why they remember his name. And
sorry, Troy.
I mean, he lost that office before for a reason. I mean, there were successive scandals while he was in that office before. He had to recuse from investigations because he solicited favors from the targets of investigations. He he took gifts from a utility that had business in front of his office, and there were other issues there too, which we won't get into, that sort of bubbled under the surface but never really came all the way up. But right now he has name ID, and I think he's probably going to be in a runoff when people are watching.
Hold that thought.
Okay.
This is Our Issues Birmingham. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back to Our Issues Birmingham. We're talking with Kyle Whitmire about Alabama politics. We'll need a 3-hour show to really cover it adequately. But in the next 7 minutes, we're going to try to give you a little snapshot. So we were talking about the Attorney General's race, and what I've been told is that there are 3 primary candidates on the Republican side. We have 2 candidates on the Democratic side. And again, this show is airing after the primary, so it makes it a little tricky. But
we get to show off how smart we are, or dumb.
I am satisfied that there are a number of undecided voters
right
on the Republican side when it comes to that race.
Well, I mean, you've got Troy King, who's probably, Let me make my predictions, and all of you playing at home can see whether I'm right. I think Troy King's probably going to finish first. I think there will be a runoff. It's a question of whether Steve Marshall or Alice Martin is in that runoff of Troy King.
And simply because you're relying on that name recognition thing.
And right now, what we're seeing is Marshall and Troy King are getting all the money. Alice has a record, whatever people think of her, for prosecuting public corruption and white-collar crime. And there are a lot of powerful people with money who don't want an AG
breathing down their throat,
who prosecutes public corruption and white-collar crime. Mm-hmm. And so their money right now are going to the other 2 candidates in that race. We'll see what happens when the dynamics change after runoff if Alice makes it through. But the other dynamic we're seeing in this race is, there appears to be a lot of gambling money. It gets laundered is a very loaded word, but it gets shuffled through political action committees, so it's very hard to trace. But it's there. And it appears that your traditional Alabama gambling interests seem to be supporting Troy King. The rumors out there that the Indian gambling interests are supporting Steve Marshall, but good luck finding that money in the pipe.
Well, my phone rang off the hook the day after the Supreme Court declared sports betting okay. I said, "Wait a minute, you're in Alabama."
Yeah,
there's
one
hurdle
too.
that must be overcome first.
Right.
Everybody's talking about the lottery, all the candidates, governors, I'm speaking of primarily, and they all seem to be in favor of it, both sides of the hall.
The Republicans have always caged it in. Well, I'm in favor of it going to.
They want to call it some nice word, like education lottery,
right? Or going to a vote of the people. I'm in favor of vote of the people. That's a nice neutral way of being in favor of a lottery because the general, the conventional wisdom right now is if we did have another lottery referendum like we had in, I believe it was 1999.
Siegelman.
That it was Siegelman, under Siegelman, that a lottery today would probably pass. I'm not sure. I don't know if that's true, but that's everybody's gut talking. So I think that, especially if a Democrat wins this fall, you're likely to see the lottery issue come back up.
I just don't know that.
And we'll get a lottery just in time for sports books to be the big thing.
They won't have to keep changing phone numbers. They've changed the dynamics of that. Everything's online now for the betting public.
I wouldn't know anything about that.
Well, I hear stories about it. So what else is going on in our state? We've got some. There was something that was reported some time ago, I think by you, about a nuclear plant up in Huntsville.
Yeah, we've got some developments on that this week. It's the Bellefonte nuclear power plant. It's in northeast Alabama. I actually wrote in a column as in northwest Alabama because I wasn't using my brain. And so I've been getting lots of letters saying it's in northeast Alabama. But TVA designed this plant in 1968. They started construction on it in 1974, 3 years before I was born. And they worked on it, and they'd stop, and they'd start again. And until a couple of years ago, they decided they're going to call it quits, and they're going to sell this property to a private developer. The developer who has agreed to buy it is a billionaire from Chattanooga named Franklin Haney, who is notorious for spreading campaign donations all around.
Was that the Social Security building guy?
The same guy who owns the Social Security, the old Social Security building here in Birmingham. He's sort of a government's landlord. He develops property and leases it to the government. But everyone who's looked at this nuclear power project's like, how is he ever going to get this thing off the ground? He needs more money than even he has, and he's going to need approval from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Atomic Energy Council, all these folks in D.C. Well, we find out this week that he hired a consultant named Michael Cohen.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah,
the
Michael Cohen,
the fixer.
Yeah, the fixer. Donald Trump's personal attorney is Haney is now one of his clients.
Nice
and not
gig.
only is he working,
Nice gig,
may he
Michael.
be working his connections with the president, but is also trying to get investment from Qatar, from Arabs in the Middle East, to fund this nuclear power plant in North Alabama.
Do they need power up there? I was told they didn't need any power.
That is
Alabama Power Company didn't want
that's
it.
one of the big questions of why this is how this could ever work. The answer, if you ask TVA or Alabama Power, is no, they don't need it.
They don't need power.
Right.
Stay tuned for that one, folks. We don't know where that's going, but we just remember you heard it here first, or second, actually. You heard it from you first, I think. Thanks for being with us.
Appreciate you having me.
You're always a pleasure to interview, and an easy interview, because you talk, and I don't have to think too much. This is Our Issues Birmingham. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next week.